The key to the lean aesthetic you're looking for revolves around good muscle definition. And good muscle definition requires adequate muscle growth. Adequate muscle growth requires progressive overload, which is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the fitness space. If you've ever been frustrated by a lack of muscle growth or an inability to break through a strength plateau, this is the lesson for you. Progressive overload is the key component to breaking through those frustrations. It's basically gradually increasing the stress placed on your muscles to promote growth and strength. And the way it works is that our muscles adapt to the demands placed on them. The more demands we place on them, the more they'll adapt. And if we aren't putting much stress on our muscles, we'll see atrophy. That's why if you've ever broken a limb, it feels so much weaker after the cast is removed. Our body is constantly adapting, which really is a way our body protects itself. If we don't stress certain muscles and they atrophy, the muscles will eventually get smaller as a way to reduce our overall metabolic burn and conserve energy. If we apply stress to certain muscles, our body will adapt to ensure that the next time that stress is applied, it can handle it. And if your goal is to get bigger muscles, you're going to have to figure out different ways to apply additional stress. So let's get into the many ways to apply progressive overload. The most common method of progressive overload is by adding more weight to your exercises. And we'll use a basic squat as an example. If you've just re-racked the barbell after completing your fifth rep of that exercise and thought you could have done another rep or two, you can add more weight to the bar for the next set. That's progressive overload utilizing weight as the variable. If you're a little nervous about adding weight, you can add in another rep. So instead of doing 5 reps like you did before, you can do 6 reps at that same weight. Again, that's progressive overload. Either way works, and one isn't better than the other. However, there is a point where adding another rep may not make sense and adding more weight is the optimal choice. This is why we usually give rep ranges in your workouts. As long as you stay within the recommended rep range, you can either add reps or weight to continually overload the muscle. But keep in mind, I said add reps or weight, not bull. In our squat scenario, I wouldn't recommend adding reps and weight to the bar for that next set. Just stick to one or the other for each progression. So you can add a rep for one set and then add weight for the next set or vice versa. That's the simple side of progressive overload. But at a certain point, you can't add another rep nor any more weight. So now what do you do? That's where adding in complexity into the movement can help. Complexity can be slowing down the movement. It could be adding in a pause at the toughest spot. It could be reducing the rest times in between lifts. All are ways you can make this simple exercise more difficult, which will lead to the muscle growth you're looking for. Over time, you'll max out each set, weight, and add in all the complexity you can think of, which means it's time to move on to a different exercise to stimulate the muscle in a different way, and then go through the process all over again. That's how you'll optimize muscle growth with progressive overload. Now for some tips to help you know when it's time to implement some of these methods of progressive overload. But before we get into that, it may be helpful to do an overview of what's called warm-up versus working sets. A warm-up set to me is any set that's not 1 to 2 reps shy of failure. If you feel like you can do 3 to 4 more reps for an exercise, that's a warm-up set, not a working set. And we only really count working sets. A working set is any set that's 1 to 2 reps shy of failure or a set taken all the way to failure. And if you've never taken a set to failure, I often encourage people to try when it feels safe. And failure is primarily when your form really starts to break down. A slight deviation from perfect form is normal, but if your joints, hip, and back isn't in the right position to support the load, you're past failure and need to stop as soon as possible. Okay, so that's a quick overview of a warm-up set versus a working set. And the reason I brought that up is that you can have as many warm-up sets as you need to get to that first programmed working set. You'll often have 2 to 3 working sets in your workout, and each one should feel very tough. If not, I'd count that as another warm-up set and then use one of the methods we just talked about to make it a little harder. I usually recommend starting by adding weight and staying in the prescribed rep range. At a certain point, you add in enough weight to be on the low part of the rep range, and that's where you want to be initially. Over time, increase the reps to get to the higher part of that rep range. Once you're at the higher end of that rep range, you increase the weight, which usually brings you back down to the lower portion of that rep range. That's the most common method of progressive overload with the plans we provide. Some things to keep in mind as you explore the world of progressive overload. Number one, not every day is going to be a winner. There are days when the rep and weight you were able to lift in a previous workout just isn't going up, and that's normal. You'll have good days and less good days. Either way, it's still working. Don't push what you don't got. Somewhat along those same lines is that when you really start to push your workouts, you'll need to make sure you're doing the other things well, like recovering and proper nutrition. A muscle doesn't grow in the workout. It grows when you rest and given adequate fuel. A few other things to note. Just because you're pushing to see your best doesn't mean your mobility or range of motion should decrease. A half squat stronger than a full range squat isn't better. It's actually much worse. Form and range of motion come first, then strength. And if your goal is to get stronger and have bigger muscles, studies are very clear that muscles put in a stretched position grow more than those that undergo a partial range of motion. The last thing to note, being sore is never the goal or an indication of a good workout. It's actually an indication you probably did too much. The sweet spot is slightly sore. That's often the indication you've pushed yourself enough to see adequate growth or adaptation while still being able to recover in enough time for your next workout. Being super sore doesn't offer any more advantages and often delays your ability to push yourself for the next workout. So that's everything you need to know about progressive overload and how to get stronger in the muscle growth you're looking for. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your coach.